Ladies and gentlemen, shall we start? Please take seats. It is my pleasure to be moderator in the first panel because all of you are fresh enough for the first panel at least. So I will enjoy in this position. We will discuss in this panel phenomena which is there as long as the humankind, migration. And I really think that we are faced with the new challenges speaking about this issue. And we will have a special address by someone coming from the UK, the country which was always a target of the migrants in the almost all history, and which was really which changed the approach, especially regarding the EU, a little bit because of the migrant issue. So it would be very interesting to hear a special address by Madam Theresa May and to hear your opinions about that issue. So, Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be back in here and to be talking about what is a necessary subject to talk about, but actually which can be quite difficult. If you listen to some politicians, you would think that the migration issue was a very easy one. There are those politicians who say, let people in, and those politicians who say, keep people out. But of course, migration is not simple. It is a complex issue. And I just wanted, first of all, to set out a few of the challenges as I see, starting, of course, with the numbers. And if one thing is true in this debate, it is that everybody predicts that the numbers of people being displaced, migrating, looking for other homes, will increase over the coming years. And part of that will be down to climate change. It will be the effect of climate that is causing economies locally and regionally to fail, and therefore meaning that people move in order to find some sort of existence, some income, some ability to raise their families and support their families. So this is an issue that we do need to address. Of course, roughly speaking, the world tends to look at the West as recipient countries and other parts of the world as countries of origin. But as the briefing for today's panel reminds us, displacement doesn't just occur between countries, between states. People are displaced within states as well. And from my own point of view, from chairing the Global Commission on Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking, all of these movements increase vulnerability to exploitation by criminal gangs, by those people who have no compunction in making money out of the misery of their fellow human beings. They treat them like commodities. If I just step back, though, and think about the other challenges of the migration issue, we have, on the one hand, countries that need migrants in order to be able to support their economies, and, of course, on the other hand, countries where people are not able to support themselves and want to leave. But there becomes what I consider to be a slight moral and ethical dilemma here. And if I just give one example, I was at a meeting yesterday and we were hearing about trained nurses in Guyana. And they are trained by the government, paid for by their government to be trained. They have to spend 5 years in the state acting as nurses, using their training. But then they are free to move. And countries like the United Kingdom and the United States then entice them, offer them opportunities where they're being paid more than they would be in their home country. So that fills a need for the recipient country, but actually it is denuding the home country of skilled workers who they need to support their healthcare system. That is why I describe this as an slight ethical dilemma. In an ideal world, the people would not be in a position where, as we know, over 100 million in coming years, over 200 million will feel the need to move away from their home state, from where they are living. Some of those will be moving because they are refugees fleeing persecution, fleeing conflict. Others, as I say, will be moving for economic reasons. For those moving for economic reasons, if we could help those countries of origin to develop their economies such that the migrants no longer felt the need to move, then actually this, I think, would be of benefit to all sides of this argument. It's one of the reasons why I oppose my government's, once I step down as PM, my government's decision to reduce our percentage of GNP spent on international development aid, because I think that aid is hugely important in this task of trying to develop home country economies. So I would like to see the world, governments around the world, looking longer term at this issue, recognising there's a short-term issue to deal with, but actually looking to try to, if you like, prevent the growing displacement of people for those who are economic migrants by actually working to develop economies in countries of origin. If I may just say one further word about this issue of slavery. I have mentioned yesterday the fact that climate change increases vulnerability to slavery, and this is intertwined with the issue of migration. As people are displaced, as they are forced to move, it is more likely that they will become vulnerable to being exploited by the gangs. Some of them will be moving by paying the criminal gangs for their transport, for their travel, and then end up in debt bondage and are told that in order to repay that debt, they have to work in whatever the criminal gangs want them to do, whether that's forced labour in agriculture, in fishing, in factories, or mainly for women, but not entirely for women, but in sexual exploitation. So there is another side, it seems to me, to this issue around migration that we have to think about as well. So it is a complex issue, and it is only through sitting down and recognising the complexity of the issue, I think, that we can hope to find solutions. But as I say, I think it is important that we don't just focus on short-term solutions, that we actually look to say, in the longer term, what can we do to recognise this issue, this significant number of people who will be displaced, and try to find ways of ensuring that people are able to stay where for most of them they would want to be, which is in their home state, and not feeling the need to move. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a good introduction in this subject, and we have 6 panelists. So my proposal is 7 minutes each, and if you allow me to say after the 6 minutes just one word, 6, so that we can have maybe time for some questions. And before giving the floor to the next speaker, I think that we have, at least during this session, to think about the new issues which are simply coming from the bottom regarding the migration issues. I was recently in Germany, and I was very much surprised with the comments which I heard there from relatively high officials of the CDU. First, they are very critical regarding Madam Merkel because of the migration policy. They blamed her why they have, as they said, at least 10 knife attacks daily in Berlin, coming mainly for the new wave of the migrants. Then I spoke with some Swedish people, and they told me that now they are faced with a new phenomena which they never had before. Killings from the children younger than 14 years, mainly because of the gangs who were organized there, and because they know that there are no punishment for these people. And they are very, very much shocked with that. Then I heard that a lot of countries are thinking to reduce the level of the social support for the unemployed people because they believe that majority of the current migrants are not interested for the jobs, but for the benefits. Maybe I am putting this in a way which is too tough. But some of these issues are floating around, and it will be good to think also about that, because in long term that can have a huge consequence on the level of the social benefits, on the whole societies. On the other hand, we have this title, Navigation of Migration. Is it really possible to navigate this and to somehow to try to govern that? I'm not so sure that the answer can be yes. A lot of things are unpredictable. But much better than me, some of these maybe answers can be given to us by Madame Ugochi Daniels, and she's Deputy Director General of International Organization for Migrations. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for inviting IOM to this event. Obviously, it's a very topical issue. And all of us in the room here know that the increasing convergence of conflict, climate-related disasters, and economic challenges are among the many factors that compel millions of people to move, and today as we speak, and in the future, in search of safety or simply opportunity. So last year, we broke some unenviable records. Some 47 million people were newly displaced by conflict and disasters. And this brings the global total of people now living in prolonged situations of internal displacement to almost 76 million. And the World Bank estimates that it's going to increase to 216 million due to the impact of climate change by 2050 if no decisive climate action is taken. At the same time, more than 8,500 people died on migration routes around the world, making it the deadliest year on record. And smugglers and traffickers globally made an estimated 10 billion at the expense of the most vulnerable. And I always say, whatever we do not do to put in place what is necessary to make migration safe, regular, and dignified, the smugglers and traffickers will do. And it will not be safe, nor will it be dignified. Less visibly, less political, but crucial for global socioeconomic development, there were and continue to be positive developments. Remittances increased by an incredible 650%, from almost 130 billion to over 830 billion in 2022. Of this, almost 700 billion was sent by migrants to low and middle income countries. This constituted a significant proportion of GDP in these countries and surpasses direct foreign investment. And remittances are only one part of the picture. In every part of the world, migrants are enriching their communities socially, culturally, and economically. In IOM, we speak about a balanced narrative. It's important to put this into context. 85% of all migration that happens around the world is regular. It's the 15% that is irregular, and which Baroness May spoke to, which is at the hands of the smugglers and at the traffickers, and which gets the most headlines, which is politically instrumentalized, and which for many migrants ends up in death. So this two-sided reality has huge implications. We all know that an overstretched and under-resourced humanitarian response alone cannot and should not be the solution, so I fully agree, Baroness, with your comments that we need long-term solutions. So at IOM, we always work to save and protect lives, assist people displaced by crisis, and to prevent the displacement even happening in the first place while seeking longer-term solutions. But we know these efforts can only go so far. We do need to recognize that migration is not only inevitable, but it's necessary for sustainable development. In many countries, it's remittances that are driving SDGs. It's remittances going mainly into the hands of women that are paying school fees, that are paying medical bills, that's putting food on the table. We've seen in countries reduction in child mortality, maternal mortality, 16-fold due to the impact of remittances. The key is to harnessing the potential of migration to build safe and regular pathways. We know that this is the best way to reduce the risk of exploitation and uphold migrants' rights. It can be a win-win solution for everyone. The system we have now is the perfect system for the situation at the end of World War II. However, globally, the situation has changed, and therefore the system needs to as well. So from IOM's perspective, solutions have three key features. Not surprisingly, and why I participate in events like this is because the first is effective international cooperation to ensure the protection of people on the move. And that's why we have the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Regular pathways, both countries of origin and destination, must share responsibility for strengthening and expanding labor migration pathways. Both must show clear political will to match migration policy frameworks to labor market needs. I won't mention the country I recently visited where they have a temporary migrant scheme, and they know that the temporary migrant scheme is how they get permanent migrant workers for their labor market. But the political headwinds are such that the leadership was not able to say that we need permanent migrant workers, and therefore continue to use a mechanism that is not fit for purpose for the labor market nor for the migrants to address the problem. And our research shows that right now, labor shortages are costing businesses in the top 30 economies an estimated $1.3 trillion a year. So there are win-win solutions here for the countries of destination, countries of origin, and the migrants themselves. The second feature of a solution is data and analysis on migration and displacement to, as I mentioned, balance the narrative and challenge the stereotypes, and to plan, both in terms of the socioeconomic needs in the countries of origin, but also as well in destination. And the third feature of sustainable solutions is diverse and expanded partnerships. And I don't now have enough time to go into the extensive partnerships we're engaged in, and I hope my colleague from UNHCR will soon be here, because UNHCR is one of our key partners in this. But ultimately, it requires obviously UN, the multilateral system, the member states, the civil society, huge role for the private sector, and increasingly key roles for the diaspora. And with that, you didn't say 6, so maybe I'm giving back some time. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. The next speaker is President Egils Levits, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that the public debate on immigration is often confusing because the different aspects and different levels of argumentation are mixed up. I would first stress that the immigration, or the problem of immigration, is governed by two main contradictory principles. the first principle is that there is a right to emigrate, and many people won't use this right. Only few states in the world, like North Korea today or previously Eastern Germany, denied this right. There is a right to emigrate. But on the other hand, there is not a right to immigrate. There is not a corresponding right. And this creates a tension. You have a right to leave your country, but there is no absolute, so to say, clear whether you will have a right to immigrate. And both principles, which are contradictory, as I said, have their sense. Also, right to emigrate belongs to one of the fundamental human rights, is mentioned also in the Human Rights Declaration from 1948. On the other side, there is a right of states to control the border, to control to control the border, and to control the composition of their own population, also accordingly to their own needs. And this contradictory two principles, they have at least 4 dimensions, and Madame May already mentioned them. Also, there is individual level, also motivation. There are absolutely different motivations. Political level, moral level, you mentioned also that, and legal dimension, legal level. And if we want to have a good discussion, we should discuss on one of these levels concerning this contradiction between the two principles. The right to, I said already, there is no right to immigrate. There is a right of the state to control their own border, but there are 2 exceptions from this right. First is voluntary political decision of the state to leave in the country legal immigrants they need as a labor force and maybe students and others. This is a political decision, and this creates no problem. No problem. So if they want, the state want to have immigrants, then it is possible easily to do it. There is a side effect of this, because most countries which want to have a legal immigration, they want not to have the people, the vast majority of the people who want to go to the state. They want a specific small group, that means skilled workers. Yesterday we have already spoken on that. And these skilled workers will not have then more for the countries of origin. And they are investing in the education, and they are leaving the country. This is a side effect of this legal immigration, this one window of immigration. The second window, legal window of immigration, are refugees. Recognize refugees accordingly to national law or accordingly to international law. And I have 25 years of experience as a judge in European Court of Human Rights and European Court of Justice, also dealing with refugee issues. And I would say that the vast majority of the refugees who asked formally for the asylum are not recognized, and there are no valid reasons for that, because the majority want, and it is understandable, to live in a better conditions. But specific conditions for refugees are individual persecution, and it's in only a minority, a small minority of the case, we can say that. And that means the real problem, also I said legal immigration, then of course recognized refugees, but the real problem is you said only 15% maybe, but I think in Europe it's a little bit different. But anyway, the real problem is illegal immigration or illegal migration and non-recognized refugees. And there are, of course, the two contradictory interests, also to leave our own country and to live in a country with better conditions. It's a human wish. We cannot deny that. It is. But on the other side, there is an interest of the society, of the destination country, not to be overstretched by social burdens and also by cultural assimilation. And each society has a certain capacity of assimilation of newcomers. And if this capacity is overstretched, then of course it transforms in a political, rather right-wing politics and so on and so on. And I think the state it is necessary to look into that. And you mentioned already that the example of Germany. Obviously, the German government, or then Chancellor Merkel, overstretched the capacity of the society, and we have still now the repercussions of this decision, 2015. So I would say that we can not solve the issue. This is my opinion, not solve the issue. We can only manage it in a better or not so good way, also to manage. And how to manage? Also, I would say that invest in a law enforcing mechanisms. Also, only few non-recognized refugees in Europe are sent back. Also, they are living in Europe in an uncertain legal situation, like in US. In US, they have the tradition from time to time to give an amnesty. Now it's discussed also by candidate Harris. So in Europe, there are very rare or no such tradition to give if you are living in illegal situations since 5 or 10 years, and then to give amnesty and so. It is, maybe it is also possible from time to time to give amnesty, but it will not solve the problem. It means that there are prospects to come illegally to the country and maybe to hope to amnesty. I don't know whether it would be a good solution. I think a solution which could be discussed is, so to say, the approach of the European Union, I would now say, and I assume also other Western countries, that if refugee, also only persons who are asking for refuge are coming to the country, then the system is to, if there is a recognized reason, to integrate him or with a prospect, also with a thought that he, after this recognition, will remain in the country for the whole life. All to say, to integration. There is in some countries and also in the European Union, there's a way, especially for the refugees from humanitarian catastrophes like war, like natural catastrophes, to give temporary shelter, also not with the prospect of full integration, because of the capacity is, we should accept that the capacity for the full integration is limited of the society. Could be bigger or not so important, but to give a temporary shelter. And I see that in some countries which are where huge number of refugees outside Europe, outside the US, they are, so to say, living for a certain while in refugee camps. And if, for example, in Syria, and we have now the case there is no more war, there is, in principle, no more reason to come away from Syria, but there are millions of Syrian refugees in Europe that they can be reintegrated back in their own country, and many of them wanted also. We have seen that also in Ukraine. In the first month of the war, many millions came to Europe, but they want also to come back when it is possible. And when it is possible, then of course we can give this temporary shelter. This is maybe one of the directions which it is possible to discuss. And then, very doubtful, but anyway, we should discuss the capacity of the society, of the country of destination, whether this capacity, mental capacity, material capacity could be increased. I doubt whether it is possible, but anyway, we can discuss, for example, the discussions about diversity is one such, so to say, tool to increase the capacity to absorb, capacity of the society to absorb newcomers. So I saw already you sign. I am stopping here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And the next speaker is Jan Fischer. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I am very pleased to be here with you, to listen to your interventions, admiring your wisdom, and to be proud of the fact that I am a member of the NGIC, which I don't consider as the institution, group, but it's something which has been transforming to the family, as it was mentioned several times yesterday. So thank you very much that I can share my opinion and my views with so distinguished family of my dear colleagues. Yesterday, in the opening session, Ismail Serageldin indicated the migration as one of the most painful, critical, and I'm stressing global issues which we are now facing, having accompanied this by introducing of the very impressive and very gloomy figures on the number of displaced persons and the gloomy trend in this. I fully agree. And I would start my short intervention with saying that migration is something which is very natural. And as we look at the human history or the history of mankind, we can see that we can see always the migration flows. People were seeking for better living conditions, better jobs, but they are also escaping or refuge from conflicts, terror. They have, of course, fears. On the other hand, the inflation could be, migration, so I am economist rather than migration is something which can be, if well regulated, well concerted, well organized, globally covered, well, let's say, managed, that would be something which can improve and enhance the sustainable development, social conditions, standard of living. No question about it. No question about that. And it's important to distinguish the legal or regular migration and the irregular or illegal. And also, we should distinguish the international migration, and this is the topic we have been discussing here so far, and we will discuss today, and we will be discussing later on. But we have also the domestic or national migration within the countries, which is something very important because it's the song about the economic disparities within the states, within the countries. It's about the inequalities between the regions. This is something what are the national governments actually facing to manage the society in the, could be said, a sustainable and positive way. So that's the second aspect or second feature of migration. Going back to the international migration and climate change, economic disparities, and conflicts, if not wars. They are the main drivers of migration. And what I'm stressing that all these drivers are entwined and has to be, let's say, solved, analyzed, and considered together as a very complex group of things and group of issues. On the other hand, this is the clear demography, which is boosting migration all over the world. Some figures, I'm a statistician, but I am not going to shower you with figures and numbers, but some of them. Demographic projections on Japan, South Korea, Italy, Spain, Portugal clearly say that there will be, in these countries, will be nearly 40% of population over 65 in 2050. And there are some estimates saying that in the 60s of this century, the GDP in Italy will be produced by in 50% by people, workers coming from abroad and being of non-Italian origin. That's reality. This reality of the markets, of the economic shifts in economy, and shifts in demography. On the other hand, 90% of the 1.8 billion young people aged between 10 and 24 live in developing countries. And 70% of population under 30 live in Africa. So if you look at the figures, you can see that's no question about the, could be said, the future of the migration. Together with such factors like climate change, food crisis, deficit in drinking water, and others. Where are we in Europe, in the EU? After the series and many years taking or lasting very heated debate, we now have adopted the EU Asylum and Migration Pact, which was adopted in this year in June, when the procedure was finalized legally as the regulation or decision of European Council and European Parliament. There are some, let's say, drivers or main features of this measure or legislation, let's say. Secure external borders, fast and efficient procedures, effective system of solidarity and responsibility, and last but not least, embedding migration in international partnership. Sounds great, sounds lovely, sounds nice. But what was said several times before in many interventions by many people sitting here, that there are clearly gaps between measures, legislation, concepts, definitions, and implementation potential, and to operationalize concepts, theory, even legal framework to reality. And I'm afraid that it will be very uneasy. And look at one thing, that's no secret that this pact on asylum and migration, some governments and some member states of the EU accepted with gritted teeth. No question about it, with gritted teeth. And it is a very divisive issue, migration in Europe, opening the door for populists, extremists, liars. By the way, migration is the area when the, let's say, hoaxes, fake news have such a good soil as never else. It's never else. And look at one thing, that the producers of this propaganda, of these lies, fake news anyway, are highly, I would say 90% correlated with the pro-Russia propaganda in going through Europe. And that's the very sensitive political issue, and that's the song about the future of Europe. We are talking about the protection of external borders. And what's going on in reality? Germany, let's say, returns the border controls on the borders not only with Austria and the Czech Republic, as it was so far, but also with Switzerland, France, Belgium, others, always so. And some people, some skeptically sounding people clearly say, isn't it end of the Schengen? And Schengen is one of the, could be said, most important, if not iconic, let's say, pillars of the European Union, manifesting the, let's say, free movement of people. So this is something which could, the attitude towards migration could, despite of this nice legislation, thanks God we have it, but it could actually lead to the further fragmentation of Europe. One thing at the end, two things at the end. Refugees from Ukraine, we have to speak about them. And it was, on the other hand, something very encouraging and very positive. What happened when, for instance, nearly 500 million people from Ukraine came to the Czech Republic, and we
You said 500 million.
By 500 million, 5 million, sorry about it, sorry. It's the blank moment of the very old man.
Really?
But 5 million. Incredible. And we did it, we managed it, and in this case, Merkel could say, we schaffen das. We schaffen das. We can do it. And we did it. In very efficient way. The same in Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. And we saw the unprecedented cooperation of the national authorities, governments, with the NGOs, which is actually unprecedented. By the way, NGIC organized a fact-finding mission to Warsaw to look at just the on-site how the situation looks in April 2022, and we saw it just on site how it looked. Excellent, really excellent. So this is something positive. We could say now the Ukrainians are well integrated, well perceived, with some exception, of course. That's pretty clear. And Russia propaganda is doing its best to erode this support to Ukraine and Ukrainians living in these countries. So, how to proceed? Globally, that's the first thing. And with the responsibly acting politicians, with good leadership, with good and smooth international cooperation, not only in Europe, but also could be said between Europe and others.
Jan.
And 6. Okay, so I am coming to the end very quickly.
15.
Saying that what we need, that it was said here, analyzing of migration flows. What we need is the data well shared between the responsible organizations. We have the very huge databases on migration settled in Eurostat in Luxembourg, which is very good, covering Europe. But it's not the case globally or over the world. And I was wondering recently when I looking at some statistics and some data on migration to several different sources, and I was so surprised, like the figures on the same thing could differ. And that's a problem. That's a problem of statistical and information infrastructure in developing countries, which are underinvested, of course. So if we don't take it as a global issue, if we don't keep on solidarity, if we don't keep on, let's say, a human approach in this, we fail. But I am still so optimistic that I believe that it will not happen. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Peter, floor is yours. Peter Stoyanov.
Here. Allow me, first of all, to thank the organizers of this meeting. I mean the young and enthusiastic team led by Mr. Roshan Moradov. Thank you very much for everything. So, I fully agree with the previous speakers. One thing I would like to underline, why should we be surprised by migration as a phenomenon? Migration is a phenomenon that has existed since the beginning of the mankind. No need to go back to Moses. But allow me to focus my exposé on current developments and on the European Union, where the issue of migration has become extremely sensitive, provoking debates more than ever before. European public opinion is torn between our humanitarian tradition of helping people in need, inherited by Christian ethics and the Enlightenment, and the fear that foreigners might undermine both the foundation of these ethics and traditions and the immediate benefits of European citizens, such as work, healthcare, social benefits, etc. The welfare issue is particularly acute in some countries, where local residents fear that welfare and health funds are being siphoned off by people who have contributed nothing to them. Discontent often turns into fear because of the demonstrations of vandalism and even deliberate violence, resulting into deaths. And the polarized public debate, however, makes it difficult to explain that not all migrants have come to Europe to drain social funds, much less to kill innocent people. So how did European states manage to see migration as such a substantial threat, requiring new policies and significant spending? One fact, the European Union has spent over 11 billion euro for deportations only since September 11. One of the popular explanations is that security threats are socially constructed. Politicians are blamed for that, as some of them tend to frame immigration as an emergency, with securitization as the only solution. Time and experience, however, have shown an opposite effect. Stricter policies are leading migrants to take more risks, which in turn requires more spending on border control. The truth is that the increased controls and deterrence had counterproductive effects and contributed to the flourishing of the international smuggling industry. The result, only in the period 2014-2021, we have registered over 30,000 death cases on journeys to Europe, 30,000 death cases. There is another negative effect concerning the general application of European law and European norms, which are one of the biggest achievements of the European Union. And I envisage the so-called outsourcing of responsibilities to third countries, creating offshore black holes where European legislation is conveniently bypassed. The example, the bilateral agreements between Italy and Libya in 2009, which allowed Berlusconi government to make direct deportations to Libya before processing any asylum claims, avoiding EU regulations. Of course, Italy has its practical arguments. Italy, Greece, and Spain are most vulnerable to the first waves of migrants from Africa and the Middle East. The harsh reality is that the migrant issue has already long become one of the bones of contention between EU countries, and disagreement has been growing. Look at the last 10 days. Since the middle of September this year, Germany brought back border control within the Schengen zone, initially for 6 months. Reactions were swift and numerous. Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis said the response cannot be unilaterally scarping Schengen and dropping the ball to countries which sit on Europe's external borders. Mitsotakis' reaction is understandable. Several years ago, more than 1 million refugees arrived in Greece, most eventually moving to the west. Polish Prime Minister Tusk also criticized Germany's tighter border control, calling for urgent consultations. Until now, Berlin's response remains firm. 2 points. Firstly, the ISIS claimed responsibility for the knife attack in the city of Solingen in August this year, in which 3 people were killed. And secondly, Germany has another big domestic concern. Mainstream parties are seeking to take away the initiative from the far-right party Alternative for Germany. At the same time, the Austrian Chancellor Nehammer announced that if Germany introduced measures to send more immigrants back across their shared border, Austria would do the same, sending more people towards the Balkans. It is reported that the Dutch government will ask to be excluded from EU asylum rules as soon as possible. After these new developments, the biggest danger in this respect is the risk of an implosion inside the European Union caused by these controversial migration policies. Therefore, I really believe that it will be one of the most critical jobs of the new European Commission, among so many others. But instead of putting all our efforts into debating how to reduce immigration to Europe, we should focus more on the rethinking of human mobility governance and the resources it offers to the old continent. Let's ask the question, can Europe exist without immigrants? With its aging population, low birth rate, and growing need for labor? The answer is obvious, no. And there are clear examples from Eastern Europe, which is more familiar for me. For years, employers in Bulgaria have experienced a shortage of both high and low-skilled personnel. According to the data from the Bulgarian Employment Confederation, there are potential employees for only 30% of the open positions on the labor market. The picture is similar in the countries of Central Europe, closest to us. Even Hungary is seeking to attract applicants from third countries for its latest investments. China announced that it will build a 7.3 billion battery plant there, and the German Rheinmetall recently opened a new factory in the country. The Czech Republic, in turn, simplified the recruitment process for critically needed workers in September last year. Meanwhile, in Poland, made the procedure for permanent residence easier for holders of work permits with professions needed for the Polish economy. Likewise, the number of foreign workers in Slovakia increased 7 times between 2013 and 2023, with some manufacturers such as the British car maker Jaguar Land Rover. And Slovakia relying heavily on labor from abroad, but there are still more than 80,000 long-term unfilled vacancies, 80,000. The question is not whether immigration is good or bad, but how it can yield benefits for both destination countries and third country workers. Therefore, the primary goal of the European Union should be to maximize the gains from immigration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And since Raouf Mazou is not here, the next speaker is President Pahor. So, Borut, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The problem of modern migration has distinct moral and political dimension. It has been already said different times today. A moral dimension in terms of our overall compassion and solidarity with people driven away from home for different reasons. Could be economic opportunities, conflicts, political or other persecution, climate change and natural disasters. And the political dimension in terms of the difficulty of reaching consensus on their management at the local, national, and international level, with a particular role being played by the element of illegal migration. It has also been already said several times, related to human trafficking, forced labor, and in particular, the danger of illegal border crossing. In political terms, it is difficult to reach consensus on the effective regulation of the problem of migration because legal and illegal migration are often mixed in political discourse due to generalization. Therefore, and this is also has been already said, therefore, one of the first and most important ways to delineate the debate and form a dominant majority to effectively address the problem of migration is to delineate between legal migration and illegal migration. How politically sensitive this issue is can be seen all over the world, including in the Western world, on both sides of the Atlantic, in the United States and the European Union. The problem of migration, especially the problem of illegal migration, is one of the central political problems before the US presidential elections and was one of the central problems before the European parliamentary elections. Interestingly, both in Washington and Brussels, due to the sensitivity of the problem, they rushed to take new measures to limit the political damage caused by both people's well-founded and unfounded concerns and fears in the elections. Last year, the Secure the Border Act of 2023 was passed in Washington, D.C., with this year's new White House measures to curb illegal migration, especially at the border with Mexico. It has been already mentioned by my friend Fischer. On May 14, 2024, the Council of the European Union finally adopted an important agreement on migration and asylum, which represents a reform of the EU common migration and asylum policy. This agreement, also known as the Migration and Asylum Pact, is the result of many, many years of negotiations and efforts to establish a fairer and more coherent migration management system in the EU. The key elements of this pact are a solidarity mechanism, accelerated asylum procedures, but basically it tries to make this important difference between illegal and migrants and illegal migrants. And then at the end of this act is very important chapter of better management of the external borders. Action on both sides of the Atlantic is characterized by the fact that it took a lot of time and effort to finally adopt measures, a lot of time. It is also common for Washington and Brussels, especially in the fight against illegal migration and the protection of external borders, that these measures are seen as insufficient in part of the public. Still, from this we can conclude that in the coming years we will see the continuation of political controversies about sufficient and insufficient actions of the Western world regarding illegal migration. If the measures do not prove effective, they will almost certainly be removed towards more radical ones. Washington and Brussels also have in common that in all these long-standing debates, including on the issue of illegal migration, the political left shows more understanding of the moral dimension of the problem and the right of the political and security dimension of this problem. It is fair to note that the left has unnecessarily lost some of its credibility because it has delayed more decisive measures, especially against illegal migration, for too long. It has been also said today, if in 2015 German Chancellor Angela Merkel established the so-called Willkommenpolitik with the famous phrase, "Wir schaffen das," and widely opened the door to migration without border control, 10 years later, basically a couple of months ago, the current government of Olaf Scholz has tightened migration policy to such an extent that it has introduced control at the border with Austria. The example of Germany demonstrates how addressing the issue of illegal migration too lightly is dangerous for public trust regarding the authorities' actions, which almost always leads to a gradual radicalization of the measures. Now, finally, the answer to the question of how Europe and the entire Western world will regulate migration policy will largely decide on the future regulation of migration policy at the global international level. From everything we can see today and from the past of dealing with this issue, from which we can learn at least one conclusion is clear. States must not and cannot afford to treat illegal migration too lightly, but must perceive it as illegal and prohibited and take action. In the necessary consistency is shown here, there will also be more trust and positive inclination among the public to solve the problem of legal migration, as well as social and other problems of migrants, especially asylum seekers fleeing wars and persecution. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Borut. So we have a few minutes left for discussion. I will give the floor later to Ismail, or maybe Ismail, you first, and then I will have...
Okay. Thank you. I would like to join this discussion because I think one of the things that we have to recognize is just how the facts are being completely misrepresented for political purposes. Most extremely here in the United States, we hear about Haitians eating cats and dogs. We hear about criminals and rapists crossing the border, all of that. Well, let me just give you the facts. First of all, in terms of refugees globally, 76% of all refugees are in the poorest countries. They're not in the rich countries. They're not in Europe. They're not in the United States. Europe and the United States take in 24%. The rich countries take 24% of the refugees in the world. Partly this is understandable because of proximity, because of also socio-cultural familiarity. So a tiny, tiny country like Jordan, for example, has 1.5 million Syrian refugees, and 1 million refugees going to Europe, which is 510 million people on the EU side, 800+ million people, was a major crisis for political management in Europe, and we're just talking till now about what Germany did or didn't do. Secondly, what do we say about the issues in terms of criminality? Well, we have statistics actually. Since 1960, in the United States, the foreign-born immigrants are 60% less likely to commit crimes than the native-born Americans. Since 1960, so over 60 years, 60% less likely to commit crimes. So they are more law-abiding than the existing population.
You don't have to convince me.
I don't have to convince you. I'm talking to my chairman here. I'm addressing my chairman. Then, okay, how about jobs? Well, we do expect that, contrary to all the accusations that were made, it was not so much the fact that the jobs traveled or that the immigrants took them. It was technology that forced the close down of the coal mines and other things. In fact, technology is expected to reduce the jobs that are now available by at least 25%, but will probably create 35% more jobs in other sectors. So the issue is going to be that the 25% who are going to lose their jobs are not necessarily trainable to take up part of the 35% of the new jobs. But that's part of the nature of the transformation of economies, and which is being accelerated by the technological revolution today. But I have a very easy answer for that, very easy answer. I'm old enough, and I think some people here are also old enough to perhaps remember that, when we had a one-day weekend. In Egypt, Friday only. Now everybody accepts that a weekend is 2 days. Okay, so they'll become 3 days. So with the new technology transformation, we're in the 21st century, and having a 3-day weekend is not impossible. In fact, we already see some places testing that approach. Now, if you do that, and it's out of 5 days, you've removed 20%. So the 25% loss that you have is much more manageable if you think of it in these terms, in adjustment for everybody in that. And that could be possible. The real issue seems to be diversity. The fear and concern of people who are not like us coming into our communities and our societies and so on. You either accept the transformation of the society or you don't, but that's part of the real tension where the rubber hits the road, as they say. And diversity, I happen to believe in diversity, but it has, if you want to be very clear, race has always been at the background of that. And if you think about the United States, for example, a country based on immigration in many ways, the immigration rules and the quotas that were set up in the 1920s when the big waves came from Europe, Italians and so on and so forth, came to the US, there were regulations to forbid the Chinese on the West Coast from coming in. So that these, and of course, the President Trump at the time when he was president had expressive comments about people coming from certain countries, whole countries, as he said, as opposed, when he said, why are we getting Nigerians and we can't get people from Norway? Well, there's Nigerians, but somebody pointed out to him that the proportion of Nigerians who had PhDs in the United States was much higher than the proportion of Americans who had PhDs, that this was not the way, but it's there. Diversity and political management of diversity is, I think, at the heart of that. Last but not least, we have to remember that the largest amount of displacement, over 70%, is IDPs who remain in the same country. And these are people who are in every way refugees, and climate change is going to impact on that. But we have to find designs and programs to help them. But a very large percentage of them are in the same country. They haven't crossed the political frontier. So I think I just wanted to add these to kind of frame the debate with some real facts. Thank you.
Thank you. That was not my statement. I just quoted the people which told me from the countries which were the place of the new wave of the migrants, because they said that there is a big difference between the old wave and the new wave. Old wave of the migrants were adopted, were involved in the society, and they said that the recent wave of the migrants, this is not my opinion, it's there, and I'm very worried about that situation, especially if I compare that with what we have. President Trump speaking about the walls with Mexico. We have this story of Rwanda plan in one country which is now cancelled, which was also relatively strange. So there is fear, real fear. And that is the issue which we have to consider. But my proposal is, we have a few people interested in that. Very short comments, and final comment will go to Madam Daniels, because she is the real expert. All of us are a little bit dealing with that, but I think it would be good to have your comments at the end. So first it was Rosen.
Thank you, Mladen.
Then
actually, from a historical point of view, I want to share a fact and a very quick comment. 2015, I was head of state. There was a complete and total chaos. We were calling between ourselves, European presidents, prime ministers, what's going on? We were calling Germany, Chancellor Merkel. I was calling her on a true best possible German, asking what's going on? Because actually we saw how the countries in Central Europe were shifting millions of migrants without any control, just from one border to another, semi-closed highways, semi-closed, how should I say, railways. Even we saw some governments paying tickets to millions of refugees moving to the other, just to get them out. And I would I want to ask, in a minute, I got a telephone call from back then the Prime Minister of UK, David Cameron, and he was asking me also what's going on, because it was a heated debate in the UK itself about Brexit. Point number one was migration. And when you expect, you are the UK, a member still of EU, when you expect the European Union as your partner to give solution, to come, to help, to relax people, Madam Chancellor Merkel just said, we'll make it, we schaffen das. Basically, that in a way was creating a huge point, historical problem for the Brexit debate. And I saw how Obama went to London to try to relax and fight for staying in the European Union. But honestly, nobody from the European Union was there in the right time to address the fears of British citizens about uncontrolled migration. Last but not least, my very simple lesson learned from this, as we saw the shock, how Europeans did not cooperate, did not come together, did not have a plan. Hopefully we will in the future, and we can learn from the best. Here especially, Canada, Australia, they just have everything under control. They know what they're doing, and they have great results in integrating migrants. We can learn from them. They're the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Benita, the floor is yours.
Indeed, migration is a very, very crucial topic in all our countries. And I do agree totally with what Borut Pahor just said. Of course, we have now in the European Union this Asylum and Migration Act, but of course now we will have to see how it will be implemented. But in our countries, there is great unsatisfaction about migration, about illegal migration. We will have elections on Sunday, and I think the elections will have to be determined, unfortunately, by this question. So I think we will also have to be very clear what we do. What is the major problem? On the one hand, it is also integration, because whereas the Syrians, the Afghans, and many other Muslims do not integrate easily. Some do. Turks do much more easily, but others don't. There, of course, is a great fear in the society that this is going too far. And second, we do have a great system of social subsidies and social security. They get health care immediately. They get education. But very often they don't even know the language and they don't want to learn the language, although there are many classes there. Many Austrians, for instance, in Vienna, where of course it is concentrated, they don't want to send their children anymore to those classes where they have so many other countries, especially languages, because people, the young people don't speak well the language, so of course the grade is going down. So I can only say we really have a huge problem. Of course, it's true, it's diversity, but diversity has two sides. One side is to accept, and the other side also to have the political will to do something. This is totally different with the Ukrainians. We have, I think, 90,000 Ukrainians that we took in also as a country of 8 million. And they really show the political will to integrate as much as they can. They can work immediately, they have all the social possibilities, and there is no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Csaba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mladen. I have a question to those colleagues who may have a good answer. And obviously, we have a major hot potato at hand on both sides, on the countries of origin and in the countries of destination. And I would like now to separate the migrants from the refugees and focusing only on the migrants. And even in that category, I would like to pose my question about the legal and illegal migrants. My question is, haven't we tried to squeeze too much of the regulations into the global frameworks, global regulation, or have we got the right mixture of what should be organized, regulated in global frameworks, bilateral frameworks, or national frameworks? Because if we don't get the right proportions, we have the results what we have today. So my real question is, should we revisit the global regulation, or should we bear all the consequences of the existing global regulation of what is legal and what is illegal in migration? Thank you.
Thank you. Boris, your comments.
I agree with Ismail, who have said that political handling and managing the situation with the migrants is a key, because migration are, natural outcome of the political processes, and we have regular migrations, but we have also irregular migrations. I would like to share experience of my country, which is very interesting. We have a few waves of migration. After October's revolution, we have migrants from Russia. They brought well education, and they contributed significantly in developing of the former Yugoslavia. That was very good for us, but I don't know how it was for Russia in that time. War in the former Yugoslavia in 1990s, huge migration of Serbs from Bosnia and Croatia. And the last wave of 200,000 within few days from Croatia was very, very difficult for us. But I'm not sure that Serbia accepted well those population, even though they are Serbs. But we were some kind of transmission for them, and they came first stop in Serbia, and most educated of them were opted for Western countries, United States of America and the Western Europe. And this is the problem, because they didn't change the educational structure of Serbia, which is not very good even today. And what is very interesting nowadays regarding war in Ukraine, we have 150,000 migrants from Ukraine. We have 500,000 migrants from Russia. We are 7 million people country, almost 10% of them. The coexistence between them is perfect. No conflict. They are living next to each other. This is very interesting. And we are welcoming both because we are culturally very close. And we don't have any problem with that. No one is even mentioning that. But I think the problem is that they are living in the close circles right now. They are not integrated with other people, with the Serbs, with the population, and they are living a little bit in a kind of, not in a ghetto, but they have their own shops, their own businesses, and something like that. But coexistence between Russians and Ukrainians in Serbia is, I have to say, perfect. I was very much concerned about what is going to be if they are going to enter into the conflict, but no problem between them. Maybe because migrants from Russia in Serbia are mostly anti-Putin. Maybe that is the reason, but there is no problem.
Thank you, George. There is some problem with the...
Okay. When I was Prime Minister, I built a fence at the border with Turkey because we had thousands of migrants, refugees coming through, and later on, some years later, we had tens and hundreds of thousands. But I knew that this was not the solution. It was only a small piece of a policy to regulate movement, protect even these people, because we had some landmines from the past in the border, and protect some areas in Greece that would be overrun. But never, never would I ever demonize these people or criminalize these people or build a rhetoric of hate and fear. And I think if we don't have a regional policy, both in Europe but also globally, and we're lacking the political will, and this is like many other areas, we cannot at the national level deal with these issues. All these closing of borders at the national level is not a solution. If we don't find ways to cooperate, we will continue to have divisions and polarization. The ultra-right loves this. They love migrants, they love refugees, they love the chaos as much as it can be. And just as an example, only recently Trump stopped legislation in the US Congress. He stopped legislation in the US Congress in order to keep the issue unsolved. It's poisoning our society, the way it's being dealt with. It's creating racism, and it's not just around migration. It's creating deep divisions, hatred, mistrust within us, in our society. So we need a different narrative. Definitely to regulate, we need controlled borders, but we also need migrants, we need the labor, we need the population. Refugees are often a result of our policies, of inequality globally, of climate change, of wars and invasions that we have instigated sometimes. This refers to what Theresa May said earlier, how we develop countries. Migrants, as our guest from IOM said, are a source of sustainable development in their host countries, which is very important. So let's try to strengthen that policy, train, prepare, develop migrants to be bridges and support development in their own countries. I was a refugee in Sweden, and I remember Olof Palme, who was then Prime Minister, asked me to follow him on a campaign, and he spoke, and he asked me to speak about refugees. And he said, we need to help and support refugees, And he mentioned some names. Bruno Kreisky was a refugee there. Willy Brandt, Oliver Tambo, a fighter in South Africa, and many others. So they became leaders of change in their societies. Refugees can and should be invested in as architects of change in their countries. Think of Syria, think of Afghanistan, think of Sudan, think of Haiti, think of these countries. Rather than wars, rather than going to war there, these people could be the architects of the future, the futures of leaders. And just a final point on Sweden, because I live there. Proportionally, Sweden has taken more refugees than any other country in Europe. So it did have a problem. But if Europe had a common policy, that would not be the case. But there's another problem in Sweden. Yes, they did create ghettos. Yes, the second generation did not integrate. And yes, they did not find jobs. And they went into mafias, they went into crime. So the lack of integration, the lack of education, and Benita said this, but I think we need to invest in education. Integration is not going to be something that they voluntarily do. Some societies, some countries, some cultures, some things will stay isolated. We need to have integrative policies. I was in Norway recently. What they do is when they have a refugee or they have migrants, they send them to a small community, not to be a ghetto, for a few years until they integrate, and then they can choose where they want to live. Canada has another situation where it's not a forced, from the top down migration policy, but people host, families host. They decide, they say, we want to host a migrant. You know that this policy now was adopted by the Biden administration, and over the last years, more than 3 million people came through that hosting process into the United States, and not just Ukrainians, but Afghanis, Haitians, and others, and it has slowed down the migratory flow, the illegal migratory flow. So these, I think, are some of the ideas we should look at alternatively and change the narrative and be serious about a real policy dealing with migration.
I am warned by the organizers that we have to finish. So, Eve, 1 minute, and Egils, 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Even not 1 minute needed. I just want to oppose against the analysis and the facts and figures put forward by Ismail very humbly. In Brussels and Paris today, there is a correlation between the background, the ethnical background of some people, non-integrated people, and the criminal statistics, the statistics of criminality. And the problem of our representative democracy is that, to a certain extent, a very important part of the mainstream parties, I'm a Christian Democrat, I mean, no issue, but to a very important extent of the last couple of decades, we have been denying this fact. And so people will continue to go to the extremes as long as they don't see solutions, which are very difficult to pursue and realize. But at least let's face reality, Ismail. There is a correlation between the presence of non-integrated migrants, be they refugees or be they migrants, legal or illegal, and criminality. And it doesn't help to deny this.
Thank you. Before you, Amre Musa wanted also a short intervention, but please, no more. Amre.
Thank you, my dear moderator. In fact, the discussion of this issue is so sensitive and so important, and we listened to the discussion very attentively. Some of us would detect certain racial or religious lines of discrimination. Therefore, on behalf of Prince Turki Al Faisal and myself, we request that we read a paragraph, and we request that it would be reflected in the records of this meeting. The paragraph reads as follows: refugees from anywhere should be treated equally without distinction as to origin, color, religious, or race. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Egils.
I'm sorry, refugee is a legal category. It's the Geneva Conventions. You are dumping together, and this is part of the problem, immigrant, illegal immigrant, and refugee. This is not helping, and I fully agree with what Yves Le Terme are doing. By this, well-intended, do-gooder discourse, we are losing our democracies. And we are seeing how the so-called deplorables, which are our co-citizens, are voting to parties that are extremely extreme. And we cannot go on like this, at least in Europe. And I come from a country, Spain, that has been an emigration country until '86, and a country where the mainstream of our immigration today is Latin American, and we have no problems. But we have problems with the southern border of the Mediterranean. I'm sorry, this, and I fully underwrite the statistics. In Spain, it's exactly the same thing. So let's address the problem, and let's not take refuge in an ethical do-gooder discourse that will bring us to a cataclysm.
Thank you. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think we have a common legal and political framework for all refugees. I am speaking only now from refugees and illegal immigrants. But we have seen that there are absolutely different groups. Bruno Kreisky and Willy Brandt and criminal gangs in Malmö, in Sweden, have nothing common. And I think we have common approach, legal approach. And I think this is a problem. And I think we should also, from the political point of view, recognize this diversity as an issue, that there are diverse groups and they need diverse politics to get them. For example, poor people and poorly educated young men are very difficult, or much more difficult, to integrate in Europe on the same level as a common population, as, for example, a political immigrant which is intellectual and is against a dictator in his country and so on. And I think that we have a common approach, and this should be diversified. Also, we have the problem of diversity. There is a diverse groups of refugees which need diverse, different approaches. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all of the participants. I really believe it was a very lovely discussion. Madam Daniels apologized to leave, but she asked me to send to her final messages. First one is, it's important to discuss reality regardless how unpleasant it is. First message. Second, there is a need to fight against disinformation, because there is a lot of disinformation also floating about this issue. Thank you, all of you.